Okay, folks, I'm going to do one last lecture on Bootstrap, version 5. This is on Bootstrap Buttons. Let's go through the theory here. So, pretty easy to apply using classes, so you're kind of getting used to the swing of that. Uh, if you've seen a standard HTML button, they don't look like much. They look like straight out of the 90s. They look pretty old. So it's a pretty easy way to make a button look more modern, look more fresh. You can use these on anchor tags, as we've seen. You can use them on the button tag or on input tags. Pretty easily applied to either one of these three. And like all other Bootstrap features, they're built to be cross-browser. And so you're pretty used to this. What do links and buttons look like out of the box? Pretty boring. What do Bootstrap buttons look like? Well, these are now on our anchor tags. Typically, at least two classes are applied, at least two classes, the class of button and then the color of the button. So fairly straightforward there. Button primary blue, secondary gray, success green, so on and so forth, unless you change your theme, right? We demonstrated how to change themes, and then that changes all these colors by their defaults. Very similar look, actually identical look for the button class of button. So really not much to show there. Then there are button outlines. And so you can see here the color isn't filled in, the color is just outlined. So class of button, button outline primary, so on and so forth. Really the last thing, I mean, so these buttons are pretty quick, pretty simple. This will be the shortest lecture in the history of lectures. The last thing to show is the size of buttons. And so adding the class of button large or button small will take you from a large button, which we saw on our Jumbotron actually, down to a smaller button. So that's just affecting their size. So that's a third class. You could change the class of button, the color of the button, as well as the size of the button. And really those are the three classes. I should have just lumped this into a prior lecture because that's all there is to show. Let's take a quick look at the docs while we're here. Class of text, no wrap. So if you got a lot of text in your buttons, you can get rid of the wrapping and force it all in one line. There are different kinds of buttons that we'll talk about. A button type of button versus a button type of submit. So a button type of button doesn't really have a default functionality. It's just a button there that you can wire up to some JavaScript. Button type of submit is going to be a button that submits a form. So you think of a user fills out their information, they click submit. That's going to send their information somewhere on the internet, right? So button type of button has no default functionality. Button type of submit does have a default purpose. Well, submit is different and reset is also different. Reset just sets it back to its default values. So whatever the user types, it just gets rid of it and sets it back over. So that's a reset button. You can disable buttons. We've all been on websites with button disabled, scratching our heads going, why are you disabled? Most frequently, you disable buttons when they're not filling out the form the way you want them to. So data validation, they forgot to put in their last name. You're going to not allow them to submit the form until they put in their last name. So you might choose to disable buttons when it comes to form validation. They create these block buttons. by using some display grid features. We haven't really talked about the grid. We've talked about Flexbox. We haven't talked about the grid. Then we get into some more complex JavaScript features and all that. So, okay, that's Bootstrap Buttons. Just wanted to cover it briefly.